Hello and welcome to Erupt, the home for how businesses can scale and transform. Throughout this podcast, we aim to inspire and educate to help you and your business thrive. Across the course of our episodes, we'll be interviewing industry leaders to uncover some of the challenges across the world of work. We aim to give an insight into some of the fastest growing organisations across HR and technology. Please follow us on our journey to erupt and elevate your business. In today's episode, we discuss the impact of mass-scale remote working on innovation and being able to retain the element of human creativity in the age of technology. For this session, our panel included Soeren, who is Director of TA at Wayfair, Mischa, who is Senior Talent Partner at Element, and Naomi Timperley, who is the co-founder of Tech North Advocates at GSI.
Thanks for having me. So quick introduction, my name is Soeren. I'm leading talent acquisition for Europe and Asia at Wayfair. So for those of you who don't know, Wayfair, big e-commerce player in the home industry, around 16,000 plus employees, 14 billion in revenue, based in Boston, but with a strong presence in Europe and strongly growing. In TA overall, we cover everything from Europe and Asia. And what I'm doing in the area of innovation is in TA, as we have more than 400 people in talent acquisition around the globe. We, of course, have had the discussion around how do we drive innovation? How do we continue to foster innovation? Is it a kind of like a centralized team, or is it rather something which I expect from everybody in the organization? And I'm happy to talk with the group about how we approach this and what we have seen coming out of this.
Excellent, thank you, Soeren. And Mischa, if you'd be able to jump in, give an intro to yourself.
Mischa, working at Element, which is a predominantly open source communication tool or client built on the Matrix protocol. We're just shifting gears from being a mid-stage startup into a scale-up. We are distributed first across a hybrid model and predominantly led by engineering and heavily focused on innovation on the technical side. We're at early stages of building out a holistic people organization. So I would say innovation is core to our cultural DNA, but we've got a very blank canvas in front of us around what our direction of travel is as we mature as an organization.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, winner of the Northwest Women in Tech Award, presented by one of the very well-known women in tech, Gary Neville. To Naomi, if you could please give an intro to yourself.
Yeah, Gary's a really key player in the women in tech scene. No, he was lovely, actually. So I am Naomi. I'm co-founder of Tech North Advocates, which is part of Global Tech Advocates, and I'm a consultant with GSI. Essentially, I am helping businesses innovate, but I also work with a huge amount of startups as well via programs that I've either developed or deliver through universities and the private and public sector.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for those intros. And just to jump in, quite a broad overstanding of the question, I'll pose it to everyone. What impact has remote working had on innovation? And do you think it will create more space or time for individuals to thrive? So I'll pose that to anyone who wants to jump in and lead the start of that question.
I'll jump in first. Excellent. If that's okay.
Thanks,
so I've delivered loads of startup programs. So during lockdown, the last 18 months, which have had to be delivered online. And what's been really interesting is the huge amount of ideas that have been generated during this time, and people, who have been either put on furlough or had their jobs made redundant. So there's definitely an appetite for it, but in the respect of somebody who's sort of delivering and getting really people to develop their ideas. In some aspects, it can work really well remotely, but I would also say that actually it can be very difficult to engage. You don't get those serendipitous water cooler moments, and also those conversations in between sessions and things like that you would usually get when you're sort of delivering something face to face.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know, Soeren or Mischa, if you've got anything you would add on to that as well from your own perspectives.
So from like what we have seen overall, and I think like that's something, especially in talent acquisition and the crazy hiring market which we're in at the moment, and remote, is that like we figured out that we have to be more intentional with sharing what's going on in innovation space, and also intentionally booking more time for this, because especially with like hiring at peak, like, and remote, everybody's like, it's easier to just go from like one interview and hiring manager meeting to another and just like go through this and like swift through like the massive amount of like work which we all have. But I think that what we figured out is we need to define what innovation is, also like in a remote environment, and also be way more intentional with getting people together, reserving time in a virtual world, and also like being more mindful of how people interact and innovate together in virtual meetings versus in a room with post-its, and more time dedicated to do this. And that's like our key learnings, that we have to be more intentional with really like setting guardrails around like what do we expect for innovation, what do we understand on innovation, how do we also then steer and support this.
Yeah, I would echo aspects of what both of these have said. I think we've lost and gained. Like, I think those water cooler aha moments are the true genesis of innovation, and you cannot and will not get them without intentional structure and creating more space and time, which is almost feels the opposite of innovating. If you're like creating the space, is it truly innovative? And I think I don't miss the water cooler chat for productivity, but I do miss, I was discussing this at the weekend in thought prep for this. So it's like, it's the unfinished thoughts, like where I just be like, oh, I've run out. That's it. I'm done. And somebody else will be like, oh, no, I know where you're going with that. And then we pick it up together. And as a process, it's shaped. What I'm personally, professionally enjoying is being intentional with how I use my time, and less organic, because we're rolling back to back. You go, oh, I'm never going to have a moment to think about X unless I block off this time. And realizing that actually that 20% time on like creating space to think and develop a knowledge share, while it's a steep learning curve to build that in, it's intrinsically valuable. Following on from something you mentioned earlier, Soeren, which I'm sure we'll pick up on, I question whether or not having an innovation team maybe at your scale of complexity, I wholly question whether having a team that is innovation focused is a healthy or safe way to look at the practice, as opposed to having innovation hard coded as a mindset and an enabler like in individual day-to-day practice.
Absolutely. So almost a ground-based culture. You need to have an innovative culture to enable, as you say, you can't force innovation. We almost tried it. We had Thursday morning half-hour sessions where you'll probably kill me for saying this, James, the director, saying, look, let's come together, let's get some ideas. What can we do? How can we go great? And it's like, well, true innovation doesn't just come when you force it like that. It has to be something like you say. It's the walk into the shops thinking, I just saw something happen and I need to go off that. What is this tangent in my mind? How do I exacerbate on this? And then get the head of marketing who overhears that conversation I was having to then pick up on it and then make it into something. So it's definitely something that you need to have an organization in the culture. And that comes down to, I think, obviously, how do you really define culture within a remote organization, and how does that overall impact? How would you say you could monitor the change in innovation within an organization over the last kind of 12 months? Have you been able to see that? Has there been a rise? Has there been a decrease? Have you been able to monitor the change in collaboration and innovation within your teams? Anyone?
I'll jump in quickly. So I'm sort of going in as an outsider into a team or a business, and you know, let's not forget that innovation doesn't just come from nowhere. You because you've identified that's the problem that needs to be solved. That's generally what it's about. And you know, I think it always starts with a conversation. But what I would say from what I've seen is that a lot of businesses have for the last 18 months been forced to innovate. You look at like that, even like the local restaurant on the high street or the local shop, they've had to go online. So it's, I think what's been really truly amazing is seeing people that have had no choice, that they've had to innovate. And certainly I think I've seen a really big rise in people coming together and collaborating. But again, that all comes from conversation. And I think, yes, you can do that online. But those conversations also sometimes happen better offline as well.
One of the things that I'm thinking about frequently in a primarily distributed organization is how can we best enable healthy and productive asynchronous collaboration. If there's a friction to it, you're like, oh, I want to discuss this point, I'm just going to leave that there and come back to it. Like that feels in opposition to innovation, right? But actually putting something down and leaving it for somebody else to pick up and run with. If you're going to be globally distributed and you're going to be a large scale business, we have to adapt to that sort of change rather than going like, well, let's get in, even with it, whether it's distributed or synchronous work is incredibly expensive, both mentally, emotionally, and financially. Can be super productive, but we've all been in a workshop where you're like, did we happy with what came out of that? Well, that was a very expensive meeting where we didn't move the needle, right? So what I'd like to focus on in the next year or two is really refining my approach to healthy async working practices. I'm not there in the slightest. I'm still really lean into, hey, let's just have a quick chat. I crave the human interaction and the back and forth and the unfinished thoughts, but learning to write clearly and just put a pin in it and leave it and say, okay, we'll see where we end up.
Agree. Just like building on this, I think like what we have seen is from an innovation perspective, it's just like with the pandemic starting, so many things got accelerated and like companies were forced to innovate their interview process, their selection process, their candidate travel, their onboarding, whatever, from like one day to another. And like that's something which I've seen like has just like caused a massive amount of questions raised in different organizations. Is how should we, like, this is not working since 1.5 years. Why do we need to go back and how can we build now something for longer term? And I think like that's something which we have seen. It's tough to measure this, but I would say the amount of more fundamental decisions from a TA perspective, which got solved or like made throughout the last 1.5 years were extremely high. And a lot of change came with that, which now like has to convert, let's say, into the hybrid working model. And overall, Mischa, like what you said regarding the like working asynchronous, like what we have experienced is that in the beginning, like we had thought about like the in-person meetings, everybody in a meeting room virtually, and we work together on a certain topic. But then we switched very fast to how can we cut out the thinking time, the reading time, the conceptual time out of the Google Meets, Zooms, or whatever, to then make sure that we actually, when we interact, that we do not read through stuff or discuss fundamental topics, but that we actually all come in with the relevant pre-read and so on. And I think like looking at this, I think like many organizations who then move to like a more virtual environment need to start to think, how can we then assess and hire employees and people who actually can work in such an environment, who can like write, for example, like in a very structured way, in a memo way, to then interact with others and comment on a doc, to then like come together to have the discussion on a certain topic based on 20 pages of input and comments, to then make a decision. And I think like that's something which like many companies are not intentionally doing at the moment, but like starting to learn. But I think like that's a huge field of innovation, which you outlined, to say, how can we actually work in a distributed way, in an effective way, without people burning out in Zooms and Hangouts?
Something as well that kind of comes to my mind around the whole remote using of tech versus being in the office waterfall at the moment. And the question I ask around kind of the lead time from idea to execution. Have you seen that drop off for remote working, or have you seen it kind of increase with the use of tech directly messaging someone versus, for example, if I want something done from marketing, I'm in the office, I can walk over to my marketing director, have a conversation, and I can probably monitor when that's going to happen, versus during the pandemic, anything I wanted to be done, I'd have to hope that he sees the email, might not get the phone call. But have you guys seen anything change in that lead time from idea to execution with the use of technology and remote working?
I don't think I've seen consistency to be reportable. Right? I think what keeps on floating in my thoughts here is there's no stable baseline to measure against. We've been going through a state of change. Like, we haven't yet realigned to, like, oh, this is what our new normal is, right? Like, so given that we've been going through consistent change management, what are we really measuring against? I've seen decisions turn around much faster, and I've seen things drag much slower. And I think there's a healthy dose of both business and human in all of those instances. And I would respectfully ask that we take at least another 12 months before we start trying to really measure where we're at, and see which businesses truly feel, which organizations feel that they need to adjust their business model back to in-person, and why, who's going to really skew towards distributed first and why. And then we'll be able to start looking at, like, what's the cause and effect and impact and actual nuance to measure there.
Fully agree to that. And Mischa, one question which I would have, because we observe exactly the right things, it's the same things, right? Like, on the one hand, lots of things got accelerated. We make decisions in like lightning speed. On the other hand, lots of things like get like extended until we make a decision, which you would usually have done was getting the right people in a room, spend 2-3 hours, and then make a decision. Have you seen any kind of structure or trends or so where you say these are the things would actually take longer, these are the things would get accelerated? Because I wasn't able to find anything yet.
For us, the trend is very simple, and it's sort of the more intentional organizational design aspects that we're going through. In my opinion, those are dragging, and really dragging, because they're fundamentals. People don't want to make a quick decision and then regret it and have to backtrack. Whereas the operational integrity pieces, we can deliver against those really quickly. So because they're just simple and perceived as lower risk. Yeah. I would caveat that the lack of action has a higher risk on some bigger things.
I'm just going to chip in by just some of the things that I've seen with some of the companies that I've worked. I think for me, I've noticed that, again, in some aspects, things have happened very, very quickly, especially with some of the companies that I've worked with that have developed new services as a consequence of what we've been going through. Because they've seen a gap in the market, so they've had to act quickly. I think on the other hand, because I've also worked with recruitment companies, and I think the obviously Soeren, you mentioned before about the talent problems and issues that everyone's getting at the moment. I'm based in the Northwest. And what we're seeing is companies are competing with London-based companies to employ people, paying London salaries and allowing them to work at home. The time that it's taking to recruit people is, I think, too slow. But also I've seen people make mistakes with people that they've recruited as well, because they've done things too fast. So I think it's a bit of a catch-22, but I think it really depends on what the problem is within the business, and what they're trying to, if we are on the subject of innovation, really there are some things that have to take time. And there are other things, again, if we go back to the example that I said of the little corner shop or the restaurant, they've had to do things very, very quickly. I think it really depends on what it is.
Following on from that, I think the thought that just came to mind in terms of more aligning with like agile HR practices is like, it's actually okay to get an MVP out and know that it is. And just lean on product thinking and know that you're not investing your full budget into, or your full committed headcount into X decision making. And if you don't like the result at the end of a quarter, kill it, or iterate on it, or innovate it, or dare I say, innovate it, right?
Yeah.
And there's a few aspects where we're going, okay, cool. Well, we know we need this like yesterday.
Yeah.
But if we build that, it'll take us 12 months minimum, in which case we will have changed in 6-9 months. So what's an MVP going to look like that we can ship by mid Q1, and then make sure it's a large enough framework for us to scale into, because that's what we're doing, right?
I'm a huge fan of the lean launch process, and again, you know, getting a really basic MVP, because also even it's just to test the market. Because I think one thing that people don't do enough of is actually having conversations with their customers and actually finding out if there is a need for this thing that they want to innovate on.
So, and I mean, we talk all around kind of the culture, an organization being able to be innovative. When we also talk about there being a talent shortage and everyone we're looking for, you often have pillars within an organization, with innovation being one of them. We want to enable everyone to be innovative. They want to have, there's an open door policy to the CEO. You can come with any idea. Don't be thinking it's too silly. But does everyone have to be innovative in the organization when you're looking to hire?
Not at all. That's a toxic idea to think that somebody has to deliver against X, right? Like, it is super okay to just turn up and deliver against your deliverables and go home and play checkers or take your dog for a walk and compartmentalize life and work. I had to have a chuckle there for a second. You're saying that there's a talent shortage. Like, sure, that's one frame of reference. Or you could say there's absurd and painful growth. Right, you know, or you could say we don't invest in STEM education early enough, right? Depending on what you're hiring for, right? One of my favorite sort of tongue-in-cheek responses to that is like the war on talent. There's a war for talent. If that's your mindset, you're probably not very good at hiring. Some people are good at building talent functions and caring for candidate experience and building companies and hiring. And other people think they're fighting a battle against some unseen foe, right? If you're trying to compete with FANG, have fun.
Yeah, I think like overall, the answer is more or less, it depends, right? So, and I think like to the question earlier is, should innovation be a centralized team or like parts of the organization and then like bring it to everybody else? Then you cannot expect that everybody innovates because it's not in the DNA. But overall, if you have in the DNA that everybody's expected to grow and to innovate, and then like what does innovation actually mean is defined in a good way for the different levels and also jobs in the organization, then yes, you can foster it. You can also help people to grow. You can encourage everybody to think about like from an MVP. If you have an MVP first mentality in the organization, then it works, because then you also encourage people to try out new things, to question the processes, to like think left and right, and think about like, okay, if we're 10x of where we are doing at the moment, like how could this look like? But I think like it's like, come back to like my first sentence, I think it very much depends on how the organization is structured. What we did in TA at Wayfair is, when we asked ourselves the question around a year ago approximately, how do we want to foster and define innovation for the organization? Because we have a so-called talent acquisition process and innovation team, right? But then like we said like, okay, everybody in the organization is expected to innovate, to grow, and to question processes and like the way how we do things. So what we did was really saying that the process and innovation team and talent acquisition is really looking at like OKR metrics and like signals and like larger projects of like new technology implementations and so on. But then we also built like a team we call the talent lane, innovation talent lane, which defined guiding principles for innovation, and then rather saw this group as the enabler for the entire organization to understand what kind of innovation is driven, to like spark an interest in driving innovation, but also to give them the toolkit to say, if I'm like just like fresh from university, have not seen product thinking, but have an idea and have a problem which I want to solve, that I have like a team or a repertoire of different tools which I can use to actually enable faster innovation and faster thinking. And then also like a link towards our performance models in the sense of, what do we actually expect from an innovation point of view, from an innovation perspective, from different people, and then also like linking that back to how, like, what is the situation people are in, right? Because if you have for example, talent acquisition, if you have recruiters handling 4 times the workload which they did in the past due to like the global challenge in job market and the exponential growth which e-commerce companies have seen, like us, then like you cannot expect that everybody is spending like a day a week on innovation. Then you have to like also like be real with what can be done, but then like as probably a centralized innovation team which actually looks at like what are the structural things which we need to change, which we need to like influence, with a culture that everybody is encouraged to innovate and is like knows how to innovate in the organization, is extremely powerful. But it very much depends on like what is the role, how's innovation structured in the team, and also like are you in a business that where everybody can innovate the way how they work, or where you have a large population of employees who just need to do their job in a certain environment, and you cannot like not everybody is or like has the opportunity to challenge the way they work. And I think like that's where I think it comes back to, it depends what kind of company, organization, infrastructure you build and you have. And I'm a fair believer of like everybody should be able to innovate because everybody knows their area and their responsibilities best. But then like it has to have like a team that actually enables and like uncovers the innovation which is going on to inspire others to innovate as well.
I'm just going to add in there really quickly that it's, I think there should be opportunity for everybody to be able to share ideas. I think it's up to an organisation to be able to identify the problems that they want solving in the first place. But also there's been a huge rise in corporate innovation. So you've got companies like L Marks, you've got organisations like This Is Progressive that work with really big organisations who can't innovate, or if they can innovate, they're still not solving the problems that they want. And they're actually going out into the startup market to see if they can retrofit something that somebody else has already come up with an idea to solve the problems that they've got. And I think that's a really key thing that I've noticed a big rise of.
Absolutely. And we're coming to the last few minutes. So there's one question at the end I kind of wanted to bring up, because obviously around the talent acquisition side of things, but what role do you think talent acquisition can play to build innovative cultures, and how can we understand the softer skills, would you say?
Obviously, I don't do talent acquisition, but I have worked with a number of recruitment agencies, and I worked in recruitment in the late 90s in the tech sector. I think the soft skills are really a key thing, actually. I think it's about the key skills that can give someone an entrepreneurial mindset, so to speak. I think there's certain things that you can look out for. Whether it's a responsibility of a talent acquisition team to be able to, yes, it is a responsibility for them to identify it, but I don't think it should be their key focus. And I think there's certain soft skills that people can have, like an inquisitive mindset and that type of thing, which obviously helps.
I would consider the TA and people team to be cultural guardians for any organization. And if you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to build for, then you can enable and filter for that and make sure that not everybody has to be an innovative thinker, right? But like having an open channels of comms with somebody and be like, hey, is this supposed to be like that? I mean, I don't want to, I'm just asking the question because it feels like it's an obvious question, and floating that to the greater organization, and that being a safe space to ask like what could seem like a silly question. Actually, I don't know. Has it always been like that? Or if it's always been like that, definitely time to burn it to the ground.
Agree. I would add like 2 elements. Like on the one hand, I agree, as in like from an assessment perspective, if it's skills, if it's cultural fit, if it's mindset, however you want to call it. But I think like TA can definitely play an important role, but then like it has to be clear and translated to the recruiters. What are we looking for, and how do we assess this? But I think like from a wider HR perspective, talent acquisition is uniquely positioned to be the innovation driver in a talent organization or HR organization. Just like because we don't, operate under like so tight, let's say, technical limitations as many other talent HR organizations, so that we can try out new things. There are way more tools, way more startups to actually build innovations to actually help us to do new things and to try out new things. And I think like that's something where in like talent acquisition can play a very strong role in the innovation space in organizations, just like by the nature of, hey, we're working with many different sources, we're working with so many different tools where we can, like with so many different areas, we can try out things and like roll them back comparably quickly.
This podcast was brought to you by Annapurna Erupt. If you enjoyed this episode, please visit our Go Erupt website to get involved in our regular podcasts, video footage, and live events throughout the year. Thank you for listening.